Hi, so doing another video here. This one's going to be a little less perhaps useful. It's a little more personal, just sort of explaining my life story as it relates at least somewhat to how I developed my avoidant personality disorder as time went on, from more or less the beginning to right now. So the main point is to just share a little bit more about myself, but I also want to talk about why I think certain events contributed to this condition developing in the way it did, and what could have gone differently, all that kind of stuff. But it's mostly just going to be sharing some stuff. So it'll be probably very long, even compared to my other videos. But it's not the sort of thing that it's like there's an easy halfway point. There's no good cliffhanger in my life. So just going to do it in one video. And if you don't want to watch the whole thing, or if you don't want to watch the whole thing at once, I obviously get that. So let's get started. So like I mentioned in my first video, my first anxiety symptoms started more or less before I even remember. I don't have very many memories of anything before middle school, but obviously my parents and such do remember some of the stuff I did. So one thing I mentioned, I think, in the first video was that I would hide around the preschool I was supposed to be going to rather than actually going in it because I didn't want to deal with it. And in elementary school, that sort of escalated to me feigning sickness, like I also mentioned in the first video. Basically, until I was around 8 or 9 years old, I could get away with that. Then eventually my parents figured out I was bullshitting to get out of school, and it didn't really happen anymore. But I do remember that, and I did that basically because I was super anxious about going to school, not for any particular reason usually. There were particular things I was anxious about even in elementary school. So I was anxious about my grades, even at an age where like you get an E for excellent. That's what we're talking about. And yet I was still super anxious. And if I couldn't do my homework perfectly, I would basically freak the fuck out and start crying because I thought I was stupid, and I thought other people would see me as stupid. And another thing about elementary school is that the concept of making friends is not something that I really understood. I had some friends, but they pretty much all made me. It's just like random people sitting next to me started talking to me, and I talked back, and that's more or less how that went. And it didn't even cross my mind as a thing. Like, hey, I could go meet that person. What are they doing? It didn't really exist as a concept. So I didn't really get anxious about that at this point. So one interesting anecdote about that is that I met who ended up being my best friend and pretty much the only person I still talk to outside of my family. I met him in either third grade or earlier. The earliest memory I have is third grade, but it could have been earlier. But I basically didn't speak to him until fifth or really even sixth grade that I can remember much at all. So yeah, that's the kind of person I was at that point. So definitely some anxiety. Anyway, then middle school happened, and it became a lot more severe. And this is also when my memories become a lot more complete. And I wonder if there's a correlation there, because this is probably when I started doing my over-analysis sort of thing that AvPD people are definitely known for doing, where I look at everything everybody's doing or saying and try to figure out how they could be judging me or criticizing me or that sort of thing, because I'm just super anxious about what everybody thinks about me. So I more or less started doing that in middle school. Not that I was necessarily conscious of it in the same way I am now, but I think that's part of why I have more complete memories, is because before then I was just kind of absent-mindedly drifting. And of course you tend to forget things from your youth anyway, so it's not that weird. But anyway, so one of the things that was worse about middle school was presentations. Class presentations started around middle school, to my recollection, and those were my first taste of basically permanent anxiety, where teacher says there's going to be a presentation, and then I'm immediately super anxious, even if it's a month away and the assignment will take an hour to complete and 10 minutes to present. So I'm immediately super anxious that entire period. I have a very hard time like ever stopping thinking about it. And then of course during the presentation I'm super anxious, and that's visibly obvious most of the time. that pretty much started as soon as I had to do presentations and never really ended. I'm always super visibly anxious. And then I'm anxious about it afterwards because, obviously people saw how I acted and stuff, and I'm super worried about what people are going to think. And in middle school, it wasn't even really logically obvious to me that wasn't the case, and it was me overanalyzing it, which it usually is, and I'm usually aware of that now. Uh, like I can at least logically notice that most people don't give a shit about other people's class presentations. They're screwing around. They're not really paying attention. They didn't notice any of that stuff most of the time. But I didn't really even consciously consider that in middle school, so I was just super anxious about that. Any mistakes I thought I made, whether it's about the content of the presentation or my physicality or whatever. So the concept of friendship was a lot more obvious now, of course, because in elementary school you don't really have autonomy. You kind of go around with your herd. At least that's how it is in the American elementary school I went to. You do the same thing with the same people all day, every day, more or less. And in middle school, you have all these different classes, and you have these different lunch periods and all that, and you're just supposed to kind of get used to mingling with different people and figuring it out, right? So most people see that and they see new people and they make new friends. And at this point, I still didn't I was still very uncomfortable with making friends, but now it was a lot more conscious. It was like I'm supposed to be doing that, just randomly approaching people, talking to people, even if I think they might be cool. It's I'm not really into that. So nearly all of the friends I have had my entire life, which is to say through high school and 5 months of college, as well as middle school, uh, befriended me in sixth or seventh grade. I can't really think of one friend that I made ever. Um, so pretty much all the people I was ever friends with made friends with me, and the vast majority of them were during middle school. There was maybe one person I made friends with in high school that I hadn't spoken to before. Maybe more. It's hard to say, but I don't really think so. I also had my first and only sleepover in early middle school, and it was at my house, and it was with two people who I was good friends with, who I had known from elementary school. One of whom was that best friend that I still talk to now that I was mentioning. And I was extremely anxious the entire time, and it was definitely a very forced thing where it was like, yeah, kids are supposed to have sleepovers. My sister's doing it, my parents say you should do that. You want to do that? And I'm like, no, but I didn't necessarily realize that I didn't. I was just like, yeah, I'm supposed to do this. So I did that, and the whole time I was basically just wanting to go to sleep. Of course, the concept of a sleepover is more or less that you stay up really late and barely sleep and hang out with your friends. But that didn't quite track for me, and I was just like, damn, I want to go to sleep. Um, and I did have fun. To some extent, I did like those guys, and I still do. But it just that's sort of the first taste of wow, I'm not going to be able to do these sort of social events like other people. And I never had another sleepover of that sort. Um, we'll talk about the other sort of hangout related things I ever did do, but that'll be later. So also in middle school, I started to learn how to program because I wanted to develop video games. At this point, I had been playing video games a long time, but I had first started playing games that were actually good in my opinion, and so I was like, wow, that's a whole different thing. That's not just for wasting time. That's really fun. I want to make that. And I had started making some mods for games and stuff. So, yeah, I started learning that, which isn't directly related to anxiety, but I'll mention how it factors in later. And of course, it's just kind of what I was doing at that point, which may relate in some way. So, I also played saxophone in the school concert and jazz bands in middle school. More or less, I felt like I had to participate in something. It's the same thing as the sleepover. It's like, hey, which one of these clubs are you going to do? And it's like, what do you mean, which one? I didn't say I wanted to do any of them, but again, it didn't really occur to me that that was an option, or that there was any particular reason that I shouldn't. It was just a vague discomfort and kind of disinterest. And it's like, okay, I got to participate in something. I do like music though, so I did enjoy it to some extent, even though I don't really like that sort of music, and I never really did. But I put up with it. I like saxophone enough, so and I did have to do live performances with this, but of course the thing is, it was a band with a whole bunch of people, so for the vast majority of it, I was still super anxious about it, right? Sweating the whole time and in those ugly ass band clothes, and all that sort of thing, and the same sort of thinking about it all the way beforehand as soon as the date was scheduled, and thinking about anything stupid I did afterwards, like slipping or fucking up some of that confusing uniform or something to that extent. But I did enjoy it some. I do like performing, so I wish I was more comfortable with it. But yeah. Um, and another thing in middle school, strangely enough, I was sort of friends with the class clown, as you might say. It's a weird phrase that sounds like you're writing a middle grade book, but I don't necessarily have a better one. And he was also a saxophone player, so we hung out in band as well as some other classes. And sort of hanging out with him made me realize that I actually like being a dumbass, messing around, making jokes, that sort of thing in public. I find it funny. I like making people laugh. But at the same time, I find it super embarrassing whenever I do anything stupid or make somebody laugh or something, because I feel like it's something about me rather than about what was supposed to be funny, or not necessarily trying to make someone else laugh, but just having fun, trying to laugh myself, and then being uncomfortable with the result, sort of. Um, so yeah, there's that, and that was more or less middle school. So at that point, I definitely had a very noticeable anxiety about a whole lot of things, but I wasn't particularly aware of it. So then high school started, and so we'll start with the first part of high school, freshman year. So at the request of that same friend that I was talking about just a minute ago, I joined the marching band in freshman year, and again, not particularly into that kind of music. Um, and yeah, I mean, marching band is obviously a whole lot worse for someone who's anxious than something like concert band is, because mistakes are super obvious, because you're supposed to be part of a large moving choreography with a whole lot of people. So if you step on your fucking foot and trip and run into somebody or get out of place, you're supposed to be making a shape from above, basically, and it's very obvious when you fuck something up. Even if they can't see your face or something. It's not like anyone was about to come down there and call me out or something. People at football games don't give a shit about the marching band halftime show, but nonetheless, it was super anxiety inducing, just thinking about somebody probably noticed whatever dumb shit I did and laughed about it with their friend and forgot about it. And again, doesn't really matter, but made me super uncomfortable. And I still wasn't particularly cognizant of the fact at this point that people probably weren't thinking about it. It seems obvious, and if someone had said that to me, yeah, I would have been very aware, like, yeah, he probably didn't really care about that. But at the same time, it wasn't something that I was necessarily trying to repeat to myself to keep myself calm. It just didn't come across, basically. So, and the other thing about that is that I really don't like football. And so you have to sit in the stands for hours before and after the halftime show, which basically involves anxious anticipation and boredom if you don't like football. And at the same time, this friend of mine, as well as a whole bunch of other people, have this expectation that I'm supposed to be having fun, getting excited. You randomly play the fucking little pep tunes or whatever when the team scores or some shit. I don't know. And you're supposed to be looking super excited and doing your little fucking dances. And yeah, that didn't particularly fly with me. And obviously, it made me really anxious because I was trying to pretend like this was something I wanted to do, but it wasn't. And I was not passing as looking like I was enjoying it. Which of course just made me more anxious because, even if people didn't mention it, it'd be like, yeah, it's obvious. But a lot of times people did mention it because they were trying to be like, yeah, have some fun, because it didn't occur to them that it was not fun for me and that I was anxious. And to them, it was just like I was tired or lazy or rolling my eyes or something. It's just like, just have fun with it. But it didn't really work that way for me. Also, at this time, I played bass guitar in a metal band that was comprised almost entirely of friends of mine, two of which those people I talked about with the sleepover, one of which I still talk to regularly. Because, I like metal. This is the kind of music I actually like, and I wanted to play bass, partly just because it was different, and partly because I always liked the sound. I like the deep sound, and I like pick style bass. It has a really nice accentuation. So I don't know. I liked bass, so I wanted to do that. So I made a band with my friends. That was actually my idea, unlike all of this other stuff I'm talking about. I actually wanted to do this, so I asked these people to do this with me. And in spite of the fact that it was all my friends, except for one guy who, I didn't know as well, it was still super awkward, and it involved having to use practice spaces that other people might show up in. Mostly, we played in the high school band room. The band director, since I was in the band, didn't care if I just came in there in the afternoons when nobody else was using it, and we played. But anyone else can just show up because there's plenty of reasons to come in the band room randomly. So that stuff was really awkward for me. It was really awkward for me in general that um, nobody was super into it. Basically, I don't know whether I think maybe some of them agreed to do it because the sort of the same thing I was talking about. That's just like, yeah, this guy wants to do it. Sure, I'll try it. Why not? Not really that they wanted to, or maybe just that they wanted to hang out, or a whole bunch of other things. I can't explain why, but basically, nobody really cared that much about it except me and maybe that best friend I was talking about. I don't think he cared as much either, but he tried basically to put in effort to sort of do what I wanted to do. Um, but in general, it didn't really happen. I didn't really want to argue with people and say, you got to learn this guitar part. Because, like, no, no, you don't. If you don't want to do this, we don't have to do this. But at the same time, no one was being very straightforward that they didn't want to do it, which I get that as someone who's super anxious. Anyway, that fell apart, and I gave up on that within a year or two. I can't remember exactly how long. So that was freshman year of high school, more or less. So then there was sophomore and junior year is the next section we're going with here. So that's when I quit marching band, realizing that I didn't really have to do that. That's finally when I realized I don't have to do an extracurricular. There's no reason that I have to do this. I don't want to do it, and it makes me super anxious. And to some extent, it can be good to force yourself to do things that make you anxious, definitely. That wasn't one of those things. It made me very anxious, and I was very much not enjoying it, and it was not somehow helping me. So I quit band. And also during this time, I briefly posted YouTube videos of a different sort. I was playing video games more or less, and I was doing it in some part because I thought it was fun. I thought I was good at the game, and I could show people some stuff, basically. But at the same time, it kind of felt like the main reason I ended up doing it was I was basically just fishing for compliments or approval or enjoyment or something from people commenting on videos. And at the same time, I was super anxious about what anyone might say that was negative or just neutral. Um, so I wasn't really enjoying that, and it also made me feel, shitty. It's just like, do I really have to do this to pad my shitty ego? So anyway, I quit doing that fairly quickly as well. Another thing that happened during this time was that I heard that every high school in the county I live in was hiring a tech support technician assistant role, which basically was something for one student at the high school to do as a job, um, that was very simple tech related stuff. And I was hoping it'd be slightly more in depth than it was. I didn't know quite how simple it was when I got into it, but what do you expect from this sort of thing, really? Um, anyway, I thought about it, and it was basically the sort of job that I could get that would be as similar as possible to being a student at the high school, because I had no choice about that, at least the way I saw it. I wasn't the sort of person that was going to drop out. Obviously, that would make me super anxious for a whole variety of reasons. My parents' reaction, blah blah blah. So that didn't seem in my mind as a possibility. So obviously, I was going to do high school. So since I had to do that anyway, well, this could be a way to get some job experience, while also essentially being as close to the same thing as just being a student as it can be, so I don't have to deal with anxiety from that. And so basically, it entailed random tasks helping the staff of the school with tech issues during the year, and it basically replaced a class period. It was a work program essentially where you could say, I'm doing some sort of job, and I'll do some minimal paperwork to show why it's helping me learn how to be a better person or whatever. Um, and so I got to skip a class and play with some computers, more or less. We occasionally just exchanged parts, but most of the time it was literally just like restarting computers and plugging in keyboards for teachers and stuff. You know how that is. And then it also entailed a summer job portion, which was essentially doing maintenance of computers and installation of new computers and stuff, other technology, projectors and stuff, around the county over the summer. And that gave me more anxiety at first because I'm also super anxious about driving, which is partially because of the same avoidant personality reasons, which is just like I'm super worried what everyone else is going to think of my driving abilities. Um, and I'm not a terrible driver, but I'm not a great driver. I have some issues. I get a really bad headache whenever I have to look backwards. So obviously, I have a very hard time backing and other stuff like that. And I get super anxious sitting at stops and stuff with people behind me. It's like, oh, I gotta hurry up and turn, but I don't have enough time. And so, yeah, um, super anxious about that. And so I thought that the summer job portion of the job would be worse and would give me more anxiety. But anyway, I decided to give it a try. So I got the job, and as it turns out, the summer job wasn't particularly an issue. I definitely did have anxiety about having to drive around to the different places, and on occasion, my supervisor drove me around rather than me drive around, um, which was definitely, definitely a little awkward for me. Not anything he did, just, it's weird that I had to do that and couldn't just handle it myself. But in general, I didn't have to interact with many staff at all. There were a few front office people there, but mostly no one. And the other people I worked with, other than my supervisor, were just other high school students from, other schools in the county. Maybe there were two per school too. I believe, can't really remember that well, but I think that's how it went. So during the school job is what ended up being very stressful. Even though I got to skip a class period and not deal with something else stressful. So I basically had to try and be friendly and patient with random staff members that didn't know much about computers and, like to make jokes or, they're very busy and so they're kind of snappy as well. And I also often had to work in front of students when I had to if I had to fix a computer or something. Fix is used loosely. We didn't have to do a whole lot, but so students all just staring at you being like, what the fuck? Because they never really talked about this position a whole lot publicly or anything, so nobody knew what the hell I was doing. They thought I was just randomly basically being the teacher's pet or something and fucking with their computer. So that was super awkward and made me very anxious before I had to do it every day and while doing it and after I did it. Same sort of deal. Um, and the program through which I did it instead of a class involved a review by the school's TST, which is basically the person I worked for during the school year, the tech support technician. And when they did this review for this program, they gave me a perfect score except docked 1 point to specify that I was not friendly enough. And of course, that made me feel like shit, but I also felt like it was predictable and it was true and it sort of validated my anxiety. It definitely was not good, and I'm not sure why a person would think saying that was okay because it was very obvious that I wasn't deliberately being rude, at least I think. I do, like I mentioned in the first video, I do have some personality traits due to this and maybe not due to it to some extent where people can construe me as being rude because I'm sarcastic and stuff, but I really don't do that around people I'm not comfortable with. People I'm not comfortable with, it's just like, hello. I really don't say much. And some people just see that as rude, I guess. So that was how that went. And so I quit that job as senior year was coming up. And so then that's where we go next, is senior year. So in senior year, I applied to colleges, and I didn't get accepted into the school I wanted to go to, but I did get accepted to another one that was my other option. I only applied to these two. And that really made me think and consider why it was that I thought I wanted to go to this school. And, I was just thinking, that'd be a lot more work and a lot more anxiety for what? And the reason, realistically, that I wanted to go was because the same reason that I wanted to join band and wanted to join marching band and all these other things. It's just, that's where the direction I was led by other people. It's just what people do. If you're a smart kid, you're supposed to graduate high school and then go get a college degree and do some sort of career. and it's not actually what I wanted for any particular reason. I did have a degree I was interested in, you know, computer science or some relation to that, basically, because I wanted to program. I still was wanting to make video games, more or less. Um, so due to these thoughts, basically, my anxiety was getting really bad at this point because I sort of realized not only was I not successful in, learning or working or playing with others, I couldn't deal with other people, but also I didn't particularly have any real goal here other than what the end point was supposed to be, and why was I going to go through all of that for this big struggle with no good outcome, basically. So and there were other things that were making me super anxious at that point because obviously at that point I was the last couple years of high school, more or less, I was starting to realize just how awkward I was consciously, not just in a oh it makes me uncomfortable sort of way, but in a damn that's really not good kind of way. Like, so I had basically spoken to no girls my age at any age, even in my senior year of high school. And when I did, it was never me starting a conversation. It was just about everyday and school stuff. It was never anything romantic or anything like that. Like I was being weird. Um, Even just in normal conversations, though, I was visibly and audibly anxious in these conversations. And obviously, I'm super awkward anyway. But with talking to girls, it was just the usual avoidant personality symptoms, but super amped up because basically I was worried I was going to make them uncomfortable. Not because I thought that I was attracted to them or that I wasn't specifically. Neither one. It was just I was uncomfortable thinking that somebody might think that I thought something like that, and so it made me super anxious talking to them. Um, and As far as the hangouts I've talked about earlier, because I was talking about the sleepover, I pretty much only hung out with that best friend of mine, and occasionally with that one other friend a couple times at the first friend's house. Um, you know, basically none at all, not many times, and only with this one guy at his house. And every time we hung out, we played video games that we wanted to play, and it was fun. But it was never like we did something, go out and do something with a friend. It was I go to his house, I play some video games with him in his bedroom, basically. Um, and so never really any sort of hangout in public, except for occasional school and band trips that obviously I really didn't enjoy, especially with the band trips, especially with marching band. Had a whole lot of bus rides. We go places, and those always made me super anxious, and I wasn't able to enjoy them at all. So I didn't do a whole lot of that stuff on my own ever. Just a couple other random school trips, and that was about it. I never really done it. I don't go in public and do anything. I pretty much never have my entire life. So at this point, I was also pretty depressed as well, which that was definitely more new. I was always super stressed and anxious, but the depression was pretty new, because I was enjoying my main hobbies that I was supposed to like so much less every day. So like with playing video games, I would be super competitive, and I could get sick of a game really quick if it had something that I thought was stupid. But also, when I'd be playing competitive games online, I'm very anxious about dealing with other people, and I tend to be angry and impatient, like I talked about in the first video, for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk more about that stuff again later. But you get the general idea. So it was hard to enjoy that, even though I should be enjoying that, because it was just like all this shit I have to put up with for what might be a few minutes of fun. And I know it's going to piss me off eventually, so it's kind of hard to bother in the first place. Same thing with music. I wanted to play original songs that I wrote in a band, but I couldn't deal with a band. If I couldn't do it with my own friends, how was it going to go better with anybody else? And that may not be completely accurate to say, but nonetheless, that's how it felt. And of course, it would be super difficult anxiety-wise to meet up with a whole bunch of people I didn't know, especially given I'm trying to play metal, and like there's definitely stereotypes that to some extent are true, of the sort of people that like metal, and they're just not necessarily my sort of people in general. That's not, obviously that's stereotyping, and it's sort of stupid. But at the same time, if you randomly want to go find a guitarist to play in a metal band, it's not necessarily going to be a perfect friend or anything like that, right? You're just looking for someone to play in a band with, and so I couldn't really do anything like that, which also made me depressed. So I didn't really have anything I wanted to do. I wasn't particularly good at doing much of anything, and it was getting more difficult to try. So I was just sort of like, why bother? And at this point is when I started feeling constantly suicidal, and I thought about killing myself multiple times every day. Like, it's funny because after high school in 2017 or so, when I was talking to the psychologist for the first time that I spoke to, he was asking me how often I thought about it, blah, 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 the other stuff. Have you ever planned? And he asked me how frequently, like how many days a week I thought about it, or a month. I don't remember what the time span was, but I was like, dude, I think about it constantly, multiple times every day. Like thinking about it only one time and realizing, hey, I hadn't thought about it yet. Now it's about time to go to bed. I only thought about it once. That was a good day. And I was pretty sure I wouldn't ever actually try because, like everything else, I assumed I would mess up if I attempted suicide, and I would just make my life worse. In spite of that, I researched all the options a whole lot and more or less decided how I would go about it if I were to. And we don't need to get into the specifics of that. That's not the point of this, but yeah, that's just sort of where my mindset was. So, and that's it's still there today, but it's sort of more quiet and numb. It's just like I'm used to it, right? And I'm not gonna do it. I don't think so. It's not something that's in my mind constantly. So now it's more of a how many times a week do you think about it rather than how many times a day, which is an improvement to some extent for sure. So anyway, after high school, I tried in spite of wondering if there was any reason to try, and I attended the nearby college that I was accepted to. And I roomed with a good friend, not one of the two I was talking about earlier, but a guy I'd been friends with since 7th grade. And it was essentially the same as a transition from elementary to middle or middle school to high school, but just bigger, exponential, right? So more aware of my anxiety, more anxiety, and more aware of it and fewer skills for dealing with it, basically, or less ability to ignore it. I'm kind of talking like a clown right now, but anyway, so it's sort of like this was the last step, right? Elementary school, middle school, high school, you're just like, yeah, getting ready for life, and then you realize when you're going to college or getting a job or whatever, it's just sort of at that point where you become an adult. By societal standards, it's like, yep, this is the last one. This is the end of the road. This is the rest of life, more or less. Not that I thought I'd be in college in a dorm for the rest of my life, but it's just like, this is more or less what life is like. You're just going out, you're getting your degree, and then you're going out and getting your job, and it's kind of just you're doing your thing now. And so there's nothing to wait for or to look forward to. It's just like, if this doesn't work for me, then that's all there is, right? So, predictably, I had extreme anxiety due to a few different things. So, one, there were very large classes, and in some ways that was better than small classes, less likely that any individual's eyes are on you. In some ways, it was worse because there's just a whole stampede of people, and it's just like, shit. It's extreme overstimulation for someone with AvPD who's always trying to figure out what everybody's doing or might be thinking about. It's just like, I'm in an atrium. There's people every direction. What's everybody doing? Is anyone looking at me? So pros and cons, but overall I was super anxious in those classes regardless of whether the largeness actually made it much worse or not. Another thing was there were group projects, just, like anything you'd done before, except that at this point, it's not random football players who don't want to participate in the project or whatever. It's other essentially functional adults, and I shouldn't say other because I didn't feel like I was, and I still don't. So I'm supposed to be essentially working with these people who want to get the degree. I'm supposed to be doing a group project with them, and they're essentially capable of handling themselves as human beings, and I'm not. And so I felt like that really stood out, and I still do. I think it was very obvious that I should not have been there, not from an academic perspective, but just like I can't do this perspective. and regardless of whether it was true or not, it's how I felt. That's, again, sort of the thing with this condition. But another thing that made me super anxious was I had a terrible schedule where I would be late to a class if I walked there from the previous class. So what that meant was that I more or less had to take the campus bus, and I never got on it even once. Because I can't do that. I don't. Everybody's staring at you when you get on it, when you get off it, and you got to sit there with all those other people just talking and you know, looking at you or expecting you to say something randomly, depending on who it is. Obviously, not everybody's just gonna randomly talk to you, but that's how it feels basically, right? So I never got on the bus even once, and I also realized after the first couple days of walking there and looking at the bus routes, there was no way I was going to be on time even if I did get on the bus. So I didn't really want to go to that class late every day, and also my teachers started complaining about me being late every day, which I explained why and that it was just not happening. But basically, that's how it was. You can't be late. So that lack of understanding definitely did not help. But in any case, I didn't want to be late to the class every day anyway. So what did I do? I stopped going to that class. And it didn't take long for that to spread to other classes, because obviously I was super anxious about all of them. It's like, well, I'm already screwing up this one. Fuck it, may as well not bother. I did stay in my dorm. I did, complete that semester. But the only class I ended up consistently going to was walking class, which is literally just the required physical ed credit where I literally walked around in a circle in a gym most of the time and walked down the sidewalk to get there and walked back up the sidewalk to go to wherever I was going next, which at that point was basically my dorm. So just that class wasn't a big deal for me because I basically just listen to music and pace around, which I do a lot anyway. So it wasn't a big deal, and it gave my roommate a little space in the mornings, which is another reason that I ended up deciding to do it. Just he was my friend, and I was already sitting in there all the time, and I did not want to, be obnoxious. So I was like, okay, I got to at least go to this and get out of here for a little bit. So the classes I did attend related to my major at the start of the semester, computer science, were really uninteresting for me and were super basic and not useful based off what I already knew, which really wasn't because of things I knew. It was a super simple class. If you have a college degree, you know how this stuff is. You're just supposed to take all the super entry level classes first that are super easy and meaningless because you just got to do that for some reason. I guess so they can charge you more, is how I see it, cynically at least. So anyway, during that time, I mostly ate frozen food in my dorm with a microwave, and because I didn't want to deal with the anxiety of going to the dining hall for the same reasons as everything else. And I only went to the dining hall for dinners when my roommate was already going. And I also ate only a little for me when I did go because, they only let you get so much food at a time, so you don't waste any. You got to come back through the line. And I wasn't about to do that. Just go back through the line by myself looking like a fat ass, even though I wasn't. It just made me super anxious, so I only ever went through the line again when my roommate did, which wasn't that much because he just wasn't as much of a glutton as me, I guess. But anyway. And I also stayed up late all the time, as late as I could without bothering him, just playing video games, just trying to distract myself from, the fact that I was wasting my time here, basically. And I was so anxious to even go to sleep, and I had trouble sleeping in high school and stuff too, but it was worse now. I was super anxious, and so I would listen to loud music to go to sleep. Which probably sounds super weird if you're like most people, where you either listen to nothing, or you listen to white noise, or you listen to ASMR or something like that. No, I was listening to metal at a high volume, just to try to distract myself enough to eventually be able to go to sleep. And I still do that some to this day. So I basically spoke to no one except that roommate the entire semester, because, again, super anxious. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to get anything out of it. So much trouble to find someone who might be a friend and who might want to be a friend, and you go through all this shit. It's not my thing, so I never did that. And one embarrassing anecdote for you, since we haven't really had any today, and won't have too many more. On one occasion, a girl I had had a crush on throughout middle school and high school said hi to me and my roommate when we were walking outside, and I was completely unable to respond whatsoever, which was obviously super awkward. Reinforced my usual feelings about myself and all that. And that's an example of one of those embarrassments that I'll think about for the rest of my life and still feel like shit about. All right. I mentioned that before. It's like you'll do something stupid and it'll burn in your mind for a week or two or whatever, longer than normal. And then it fades away eventually, but it's not gone. And anytime you ever feel embarrassed about anything, your brain goes, hey, remember that? That was worse. Like it's trying to help me or something. And it definitely doesn't help. But that's one of those things that I'll think about forever and feel really anxious and also really bad about because I just ignored the person basically because I was super uncomfortable. And of course, I'm sure that neither she nor my roommate would remember that at all. But that doesn't really make any difference, right? I was super anxious about it, and I always will be. So anyway, getting past the anecdote and to the summary here, basically college, and so by extension adult life, which I talked about earlier, the sort of being the last step, was made me just as anxious, and it was just as uninteresting, and it felt just as pointless as I had thought it would. That's the way I saw it, and it's largely the way I still see it. I'm definitely very cynical due to this and not due to this, but um, I dropped out of college after a semester, and yeah, so that was just sort of chalked up as a failure. And at the same time, instead of classes and for a time after college, I made my last attempt, more or less, in my life at doing something with other people, which was I started a team in a video game. It was a 5 versus 5 video game. I tried to play professionally. And this team of mine included my best friend that I've been talking about. That's more or less how I thought I could manage it because we'd played this game together for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at this point. At that point, I can't entirely remember, but so he agreed to do this, and we found some other people, and we tried to make it happen for a little time. Basically, in short, it was a drama club and made me super anxious, and I was the one starting it. Again, sort of like the band. I tried and failed to take charge of it, and this had fewer of my friends relative to the total group. So I was really trying to focus down on and be like, all right, I can do something with other people. I'm going to take charge here. I'm going to make it happen. And basically, at some point, my friend wanted to stop because it was making him super anxious. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Fuck this. Because it was just going pretty terribly in every imaginable aspect. Which, realistically, it wasn't like unbelievably bad or something. It was the sort of thing that most people, it's not like everyone would have stuck with it, but they can kind of accept it and calmly end it and try something again, basically. And that's not how it went for me, because it makes me so anxious, and for what return, basically. Even if I did succeed in playing a video game professionally, what does that really get me? Even if I'm the best player, I get a small amount of money for being good at a video game, basically. Given the sort of game it was, obviously there are games that are super popular where you can make a ton, but that's not what this game was. And you know, what do I get from it? Is this going to fix my anxiety? Being able to talk to a couple neckbeards online, basically. And I don't say that as an insult. I'm kind of a neckbeard myself, but not in the creepy ways. Just an awkward joke. But anyway, I didn't see what I was going to get out of it, more or less. So I quit that as well. Um, so that's sort of the whole thing. And since then, I've spoken to only that one person I talk about semi regularly, and it's pretty much always through him starting a conversation, and it's always through text chat, right? I do occasionally talk to him over voice to play the same video game, but I don't go hang out with him. I don't have long personal conversations or anything like that. And as far as I feel right now, that's not ever going to happen. And obviously, I hope I'm able to fix this because I have to be able to do some things that I want to do, or there's no point in existing, basically, right? And also, I do like talking to people some. It's really hard to tell the difference sometimes, whether I'm uncomfortable talking to people or whether I don't want to talk to people, and it's some of both. I'm a very particular person. I think it's just sort of a feedback loop. I get used to it, and it's like, you're interrupting my flow. It's really hard to tell, but I want to talk more about that in a different video, which kind of discusses why at first I was confused about the difference between schizoid and avoidant personality disorders, and why psychologists also were for a long time. But now there's a very distinct difference, even if it's not particularly evident online. It's pretty obvious to me what the differences are. So yeah, anyway, I haven't seen a friend in person in years. I don't really go anywhere in public. I've mentioned this before, of course, but just sort of wrapping up here. I've only occasionally gone out to visit doctors. So I went to a psychologist in, I think, 2017. I went to a psychiatrist in 2018. And then I went to a psychologist a couple months in 2021 to get my diagnosis. And, I thought about doing some more cognitive behavioral therapy or trying to do some group therapy. I didn't like that guy in particular. It didn't work out. Maybe I'll try again later, but, it sort of has to happen when it happens. I can't make myself just do it because it's so much work to even make myself go to one of those appointments or even think about it, as you can tell by the fact that I'm stuttering anxiously. I have made a couple different attempts to work. I called for an interview to be a pizza delivery driver, of course, something anyone can handle from a skills perspective. I did the interview, I got offered the job, and I thought I could get over the driving anxiety and the anxiety of knocking on random people's doors and trying to get tips and trying not to get yelled at. I thought I could get over all that. When I did the interview, though, I figured out it also included regularly just hanging out at the shop and answering the phone. I cannot do that. Like I said, I think talking on the phone might actually be worse than talking in person because you can't see people's tells, basically, and it makes you super uncomfortable as someone who relies on staring at people all the time and figuring out what they're doing. Not staring at them like eye contact, of course, just looking around, keeping an eye on them. Anyway, so I couldn't handle that prospect. I rejected the job offer by leaving a message on their phone. And I have also since then tried to do random freelance work. Like, I can do some web design as a programmer. It's not particularly complicated. So one time I made a proposal on somebody's job request on a random website, basically, and received some mild feedback about what they like changed about the proposal, though they generally like it. But it made me feel super embarrassed that they said that about it, basically, and I bailed on it. That's just sort of the whole criticism thing. It's like, I feel like they're sort of going like, yeah, that's okay. Can you change that? And yeah, couldn't handle it. So I gave up on that as well. I've done a few other similar things with similar results. I did release one small video game, sold it to a website one time. I was not proud of the work, and I made like $200 for 3 weeks of work. And it got poor feedback on the website it was on for reasons that are now very obvious to me. It wasn't anything design-wise. It's just basically I didn't bug fix it enough, which isn't surprising when you're basically gambling on how much money you'll make for a ton of work. But anyway, so I haven't done that again for obvious reasons. It made me feel like shit every time I think about it. It still does. Yeah, so interactions with people at all at this point pretty much extend to random, comments online. And like I said, I'm super anxious about even leaving text comments. So on rare occasions, yeah, I've posted stuff on Reddit, just comments in threads, not whole posts or anything, nothing that gets a lot of attention. But that still makes me feel super anxious. Somebody's going to argue with me, and of course, usually they do. It's the internet. Even if people like what you have to say, it's just this. It's sort of like what I was talking about earlier with the YouTube videos I made. You're just staring, and you're just like, okay, is they going to upvote it? Do people like this? And it's like, that doesn't fucking matter. That's not the point. But it sort of is the point when you're forcing yourself to do as a really anxious person. You're trying to make yourself feel more confident, and that's it. You don't really take it into your own hands and be like, yeah, I did that. It's like it's in your hands. If you think I said something good or smart or insightful, then it makes me feel better, and if you don't, then it doesn't. And I'm always worried somebody else is going to think it wasn't, even if other people thought that it was helpful in some way. Same sort of thing about these videos. I'm forcing myself to do it because I'm trying to be helpful for other people, and to some extent, it's helping me to force myself to do this. It's not like I'm suddenly going outside, leaving my house, doing some cool shit or anything, but progressively with each video, I feel a little less anxious. You know, this one's very personal, and it looks like it's going to be about an hour long, and I don't feel too terrible. I'm going to, when I post it, I always do, even though I've only received a whole lot of nice comments. It still just makes me feel so fucking stupid. Like, I must have said something dumb, or looked stupid, or whatever else. But, you know, we're doing it, and that's the point right now. So, as sort of the wrap up, my depression has more or less become numb recently, just because, like I said, I'm just getting used to it after 6 years or so. But sort of the takeaway as far as my avoidant personality developing over time is that my anxiety and depression have gotten worse over time, regardless of what I did, how much I interacted with people in public, right? And I don't say that to suggest that people with this condition shouldn't try to interact with people, because I think, at least right now, realistically, that is your only chance of improving yourself at all. But you have to realize that it requires patience, and it requires planning, and it requires going at your own pace, and not taking someone else's, you know, an average person's casual remark about, come on, just go hang out at the bar or something, you know, whatever the case may be. You have to go do stuff like that, but also you can't take comments like that to heart and be like, yeah, I have to go do this right now. You have to take it at your own pace. You have to plan to do things that are hopefully going to go positively for you and reinforce the idea that you should keep slowly pushing your boundaries, but they need to at least go neutrally. And for me, neutral is also pretty bad. I really, whenever I do something, I need to be pretty sure that it's going to go over well. That's why with these videos, I'm trying to make sure, you know, I'm not in any way being controversial or weird or anything. And I'm sure I've failed at that to some extent, at least in my view. But I really have to try to do things that I know are going to make me feel better about having done them, so that I will try to do other things later. So that's sort of the takeaway, is while interacting and doing things in public may be the only way to slowly improve the conditions of this personality disorder, not get rid of it, but improve it and let you handle it. You have to do it at your own pace, slowly, and you can't force yourself into it. That isn't going to help. And I think that sort of shows in the things I have done through my life, and what sort of happened as a result of them. You have to do you, and you have to do it slowly. So I've kind of been repeating myself for a bit now. I'm getting a little distracted. It's a very long video. So I'm wrapping up here now. And I'm sure this video was sort of depressing and not necessarily particularly useful, except maybe in a relatability sense. But I'm just trying to offer some context to how my life has gone so far and how this disorder has progressed for me. And now you know a little bit more about me, probably more than I would share with most people. So congratulations, I guess. Anyway, I hope this was at least entertaining, maybe interesting, made you feel a little better if you're dealing with some of the same sort of shit. So I'm going to stop this now because this video is super long, and I'll see you again later.